Number 1. James Egan Holmes. On July 20th, 2012, in Aurora, Colorado, James Egan Holmes carried out one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern American history inside the Century 16 movie theater. At the time, hundreds of people, many of them teenagers and young adults, were gathered for a midnight premiere of the film The Dark Knight Rises. Holmes was 24 years old at that time. James Holmes was born in San Diego, California, and raised in a suburban neighborhood. He was described as a quiet child who struggled socially but excelled academically. Holmes graduated from the University of California, Riverside with a degree in neuroscience, completing his studies with high marks. He later moved to Aurora to pursue a doctoral program at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. By the summer of 2012, he had withdrawn from his program after academic decline and growing mental health struggles. In the months before the attack, Holmes legally purchased multiple firearms. On May 22, 2012, he bought a Glock pistol. 6 days later, he purchased a Remington 870 shotgun. In June, he added a Smith & Wesson semi-automatic rifle. He also bought thousands of rounds of ammunition online and tactical gear, including a gas mask and protective vest. Holmes left evidence of careful planning, including a notebook he mailed to his psychiatrist that contained his thoughts and details of the intended attack. Before the attack, he had unsuccessfully called a crisis hotline to know if they would talk him out of the attack, but the call disconnected after 9 seconds. On the evening of July 19th, Holmes attended a midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises at the Century 16 multiplex. He purchased a ticket for Theater 9 and took a seat in the front row. Approximately 20 minutes into the film, he exited through a side emergency door, propped it open with a device, and went to his nearby car. There, he dressed in tactical clothing, donned a gas mask, and armed himself with his weapons. Holmes re-entered the theater carrying the firearms and canisters of gas. Initially, some patrons assumed it was a stunt related to the movie. Within moments, Holmes released smoke canisters and began firing. Witnesses reported that he first fired a shotgun toward the audience before switching to the semi-automatic rifle and finally using the handgun. In total, Holmes fired 76 rounds inside the theater. His bullet struck both Theater 9 and adjacent Theater 8, where 3 individuals were hit through the wall. The shooting lasted only minutes, but left 12 people dead and 70 injured. Among those murdered were individuals ranging in age from 6 years old to 51 years old. Many others were wounded as they attempted to flee down aisles and through emergency exits. The first 911 call was placed at 12:39 a.m., and police arrived within 90 seconds. Responding officers encountered Holmes outside the theater, standing near his car. At first, they mistook him for a fellow officer because of his black tactical gear. He surrendered without resistance. During questioning, Holmes informed police that his nearby apartment was rigged with explosive devices. Investigators confirmed the presence of homemade explosives, gasoline containers, and tripwires. Surrounding buildings were evacuated, and explosive technicians safely dismantled the devices with the help of a robot. Holmes was booked into jail without bail. While awaiting trial, he attempted to harm himself several times and was held under close observation. His legal team entered a plea of not guilty because of insanity. The trial began on April 27, 2015, in Arapahoe County District Court, presided over by Judge Carlos Zamor. Over the course of the trial, jurors heard extensive testimony from survivors, mental health professionals, and law enforcement. Holmes's defense argued that severe mental illness drove his actions. Prosecutors countered that despite mental health problems, Holmes deliberately planned and executed the attack. On August 7, 2015, the jury found Holmes guilty on 24 counts of first-degree murder, 140 counts of attempted murder, and possession of explosives. When considering sentencing, the jury was required to decide between death and life in prison without parole. By a single juror's vote, the death penalty was rejected. On August 26th, Judge Samore imposed the maximum sentence allowed: 12 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 3,318 additional years for the attempted murder counts and explosives charges. At sentencing, Holmes showed little visible reaction. He did not deliver a statement, and he largely remained expressionless while survivors and families of victims addressed the court. Judge Samore stated that it was the intention of the court that Holmes would never again walk free in society. Holmes was initially incarcerated at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Canyon City. In 2017, for his safety, he was transferred to a federal prison outside of Colorado, later identified as United States Penitentiary Allenwood in Pennsylvania. As of August 2025, James Holmes remains incarcerated, having served 13 years in prison. He was 24 years old at the time of the crime and is now 37 years old. Number 2. Stephen Craig Paddock. On the night of Sunday, October 1st, 2017, Stephen Craig Paddock carried out a mass shooting from the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino, located on the Las Vegas Strip in Paradise, Nevada. At 64 years old, he opened fire on a crowd attending the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival and murdered 60 people and injured hundreds more. The event remains the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in United States history. Stephen Craig Paddock was born in Clinton, Iowa, on April 9, 1953. He was the oldest of 4 sons, born to Benjamin Paddock and Dolores Hudson. His father had been a convicted bank robber who once appeared on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list after escaping federal prison in the 1960s. His absence left Dolores to raise the children alone, moving them to the Sun Valley neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. Stephen attended public schools in the area, graduating in 1971. Former classmates described him as quiet, reserved, and exceptionally skilled in mathematics. He later studied business administration at California State University, Northridge, earning his degree in 1977. In adulthood, Paddock worked for the United States Postal Service, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Defense Contract Audit Agency. In the late 1980s, he was employed as an internal auditor for a company connected to the defense industry. Over time, he began investing in real estate and managed properties, acquiring several apartment buildings in California and Texas. These investments provided him with substantial income. He later pursued gambling, primarily video poker, and spent significant time in casinos. Friends and acquaintances described him as analytical, methodical, and private. He was married and divorced twice and had no children. By 2015, he had relocated to Mesquite, a retirement community approximately 90 minutes from Las Vegas, Nevada, where he lived with his 64-year-old girlfriend who traveled to the Philippines in late September 2017. A trip Paddock encouraged by purchasing her airline ticket and transferring her $100,000 shortly before the shooting. He had spent months planning. In the year leading up to the attack, Paddock began purchasing large numbers of firearms and ammunition. Between October 2016 and September 2017, he acquired more than 55 rifles and other weapons. He also acquired bump stock devices that allowed his rifles to mimic automatic fire. In September 2017, he checked into the Mandalay Bay Hotel under his own name, bringing multiple bags into his suite on the 32nd floor. 4 days later, he booked a second adjoining suite under his girlfriend's identification. From both rooms, he had a clear view of the festival grounds across Las Vegas Boulevard. He transported rifles, scopes, ammunition, and surveillance equipment into the rooms, preparing his attack. He set up surveillance cameras in the hallway outside his hotel room, one mounted on a food service cart, giving him advance notice of anyone approaching. On October 1st, beginning at 10:05 p.m., Paddock broke the windows of his suite and began firing into the crowd of approximately 22,000 concert-goers. Over the next 10 minutes, he fired more than 1,000 rounds. 14 of his rifles were equipped with bump stocks, devices that allowed him to fire at a rapid rate. Witnesses describe bursts of gunfire lasting several seconds at a time, followed by pauses before resuming again. Hundreds of concert-goers dropped to the ground while others fled for cover. Some believed the sound was fireworks, until people began collapsing. A festival attendee said it just kept going, like it would never stop. People were screaming, running, and falling everywhere. Within the crowd, chaos spread as people attempted to escape. Mandalay Bay security guard Jesus Campos approached the 32nd floor after noticing a door had been blocked by screws. Paddock fired through his suite door, striking Campos in the leg. Campos survived. Despite his injury, Campos radioed hotel security and warned police of an active shooter, later guiding police officers to the gunman's location. By 10:17 p.m., the first Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officers had reached the floor. They waited for backup and began systematically clearing other rooms. At 11:20 p.m., a SWAT team used explosives to breach Paddock's door. Inside, officers found him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. After the attack, police recovered 23 firearms in his hotel rooms, including 14 AR-15 style rifles, 8 AR-10 style rifles, a Ruger bolt-action rifle, and a Smith & Wesson revolver. Many of the rifles were equipped with bipods, telescopic sights, and large-capacity magazines. Investigators also discovered calculations he had written, estimating distance and bullet trajectories toward the festival grounds. In his vehicle parked at the hotel, they found additional ammunition and materials commonly used in explosives. Investigations conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department sought to determine Paddock's motive. His girlfriend, who had been sent to the Philippines shortly before the attack, stated that she had no knowledge of his plans, and law enforcement later determined she had no involvement in the attack. Federal authorities later considered financial stress, diminished casino rewards, declining health, and social withdrawal as possible contributing factors. However, no definitive motive was ever established. Because Stephen Paddock died before officers entered his suite, there was no arrest, trial, or sentencing. He left no statement explaining his actions. No charges were filed against accomplices, as authorities concluded he acted alone. His family cooperated with investigators, and his brother Bruce Paddock was separately arrested weeks later on unrelated charges. His remains were cremated in 2018. And no burial site was publicly announced. His case closed without trial or appeals, and he left behind unanswered questions about his motive. Number 3. Patrick Wood Crusius. On August 3, 2019, in El Paso, Texas, 21-year-old Patrick Wood Crusius carried out a mass shooting at a Walmart near the Cielo Vista Mall. The attack left 23 people dead and 22 others injured. Patrick Crusius was born on July 27, 1998, and at the time of the shooting was living with his grandparents in Allen, Texas, a suburb in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He graduated from Plano Senior High School in 2017 and had briefly attended Collin College before leaving in the spring of 2019. Crusius, who was of German descent, had struggled socially, spent long periods of time online, and had developed extremist views. He legally purchased a GP Wazir 10 semi-automatic rifle and 1,000 rounds of hollow point ammunition in June 2019, 2 months before the shooting. On the night of August 2, 2019, Crusius left his grandparents' home in Allen. He drove through the night, covering more than 600 miles to reach El Paso by morning. Along the way, he stopped for gas and drinks, but otherwise traveled without rest. By 8 o'clock in the morning, he arrived in the city and spent an hour driving around without a clear plan. He briefly stopped at a pizzeria but left when it was closed. At approximately 9 o'clock, he arrived at the Walmart near Cielo Vista Mall. He walked inside the store and surveyed the building for 30 minutes before returning to his car. He re-entered the store, purchased an orange, ate it inside, then left again. At 10:15 in the morning, while seated in his car, he logged onto the message board, 8chan. There, he created a thread titled "It's Time" and uploaded his manifesto, which was titled "The Inconvenient Truth." The document outlined his white nationalist and anti-immigrant beliefs, citing the Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand earlier that year as inspiration and referencing the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. 5 minutes later, he returned to his car trunk, retrieved his WASR-10 rifle, and prepared to attack. At 10:37, Crusius opened fire in the parking lot of the Walmart. His first victim was a woman pushing a shopping cart. He then shot at people near a fundraising event for the El Paso Fusion girls soccer team. 3 people were murdered in the parking lot, and 6 others were injured. The store manager observed the shooting and immediately declared a code brown, signaling an active shooter situation. Approximately 3,000 people were in the mall complex at the time. Many customers fled into adjacent stores, while others hid in back rooms and storage areas. At 10:39, Crusius entered Walmart through the west entrance. He fatally shot an elderly man attempting to flee before advancing through the store. He moved toward the First Convenience Bank inside the store and murdered 9 individuals there. He then fired into the checkout lines, shooting an additional 9 people dead. Within minutes, he had brutally shot and murdered 19 individuals inside the building and wounded 15 others. At 10:41, he exited the store and fired at a moving car in the parking lot, murdering a man and injuring his wife. He then returned calmly to his car. Within 6 minutes of the first emergency calls, law enforcement officers from the El Paso Police Department, Texas Rangers, FBI, and ATF began arriving at the scene. Meanwhile, Crusius drove a short distance to the intersection of Sun Mountain Viscount, where he stopped, exited his car, raised his hands, and told a Texas Ranger and an El Paso motorcycle officer, "I'm the shooter." He was taken into custody without further violence. The final toll of the shooting was 23 dead and 22 injured. The deceased included 13 American citizens, 8 Mexican citizens, and 1 German national. Victims ranged in age from 15 years old to 82 years old. Following his arrest, Crusius was interrogated and admitted he had specifically targeted Mexicans. He was initially charged with capital murder by the state of Texas. The Federal Bureau of Investigation classified the shooting as an act of domestic terrorism and a hate crime. On February 8, 2023, Crusius pleaded guilty in federal court to 90 counts, including hate crimes resulting in death and the use of a firearm during a crime of violence. On July 7, 2023, he was sentenced to 90 consecutive life terms in federal prison. The court heard impact statements from families of the victims, many of whom expressed grief and called for justice. Crusius remained mostly silent, speaking only briefly to confirm his plea. On April 21, 2025, he also pleaded guilty to the state capital murder charges in Texas. Prosecutors had previously indicated they would seek the death penalty, but the plea agreement resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the state sentencing, victims' families again addressed the court. Crusius did not apologize or speak extensively, only acknowledging the proceedings in a subdued manner. After his sentencing, Crusius was transferred into federal custody. He is serving his sentence at the Maximum Security Facility ADX Florence in Fremont County, Colorado, which houses inmates convicted of terrorism and violent crimes. As of August 2025, Patrick Wood Crusius has served 2 years of his 90 consecutive life sentences. He remains incarcerated at ADX Florence under permanent confinement conditions. At the time of the crime, he was 21 years old. With no possibility of parole, he will spend the remainder of his natural life in prison. Number 4. Payton S Gendron. On Saturday, May 14, 2022, Payton S Gendron carried out a mass shooting at Tops Friendly Market on Jefferson Avenue in Buffalo, New York. Gendron was 18 years old at the time of the attack. He was from Conklin, a small town in Broome County, New York, where he lived with his parents, Paul and Pamela Gendron, both employed as engineers for the New York State Department of Transportation. He was the eldest of 4 brothers. Classmates and acquaintances recalled him as academically capable but socially isolated, sometimes displaying unusual behavior. In June 2021, when he was 17 years old, New York State Police investigated him after he made statements at school suggesting he might commit a shooting. He was taken for a mental health evaluation and released after 1.5 days in a hospital. No further law enforcement action was taken. In the months leading up to the crime, Gendron immersed himself in extremist and racist content online. He authored a lengthy manifesto that detailed his belief in the Great Replacement conspiracy theory and described his intention to target a predominantly black neighborhood. He specifically researched locations with high African American populations and settled on Buffalo as his target. On the day of the attack, Gendron traveled more than 200 miles from Conklin to Buffalo. He was dressed in military-style tactical gear, including body armor and a helmet fitted with a live-streaming camera. He carried a legally purchased Bushmaster XM-15 semi-automatic rifle that had been modified with illegal high-capacity magazines. Additional firearms, including a Mossberg 500 shotgun and a Savage Axis XP hunting rifle, were found in his vehicle. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Gendron arrived at Tops Friendly Market. In the parking lot, he opened fire, murdering 3 people before entering the store. Inside, he continued firing at customers and employees, targeting black victims. Among those murdered was Aaron Salter Jr., a retired Buffalo police officer working as a store security guard, who attempted to stop him by firing his weapon. Salter's bullet struck Gendron's body armor without effect. Gendron shot and murdered him before continuing through the store. Over the course of several minutes, Gendron shot 13 individuals, 11 of whom were black. 10 victims were shot dead. The shooting was live-streamed online until the platform cut the broadcast. At 2:36 p.m., Buffalo police officers arrived, cornered Gendron inside the supermarket, and ordered him to surrender. He initially placed the rifle under his chin, but then complied with police commands and was taken into custody without further violence. In the days following the attack, authorities confirmed the existence of his manifesto and extensive online activity linked to white supremacist ideology. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launched a hate crime investigation in parallel with state murder charges. The manager of Tops Friendly Market also claimed that the suspected gunman, Payton Gendron, visited the store before the shooting while disguised as a homeless person. She claims he acted like he needed change, but was really surveying the store. Gendron was indicted by a grand jury in June 2022 on 25 counts, including 10 counts of first-degree murder, 10 counts of second-degree murder as a hate crime, 3 counts of attempted murder as a hate crime, and 1 count of domestic terrorism motivated by hate. On November 28, 2022, he pleaded guilty to all state charges. At the sentencing hearing on February 15, 2023, he appeared in court in Erie County. Family members of the victims gave statements describing the impact of the crime. When one individual charged at him during the hearing, court officers quickly restrained the person and continued proceedings. Gendron offered a brief apology in which he stated he was sorry for his actions, though the families present described the words as hollow. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In February 2023, federal prosecutors also charged him with hate crimes and firearms offenses. In February 2024, he pleaded guilty to the federal charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. In August 2024, a federal judge sentenced him to an additional life term plus 250 years. After sentencing, Gendron was transferred to the custody of the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. He was assigned to the maximum security Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, before later being transferred into federal custody. He is housed in a high-security federal penitentiary under special monitoring. As of August 2025, Payton S Gendron has served 3 years in prison. He remains incarcerated with no possibility of release. He was 18 years old at the time of the crime and will spend the remainder of his life in prison. Number 5. Aaron Alexis. On September 16, 2013, 34-year-old Aaron Alexis fatally shot 12 people and injured 3 others inside Building 197 at the Washington Navy Yard, the headquarters of the Naval Sea Systems Command in southeast Washington, D.C. The attack began at approximately 8:16 in the morning and ended at 9:25 when police shot Alexis dead inside the building. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in the history of Washington, D.C. Aaron Alexis was born in New York and grew up in Brooklyn, before later moving to Texas. He enlisted in the United States Navy in 2007 and worked as an aviation electrician's mate. While serving, Alexis faced repeated disciplinary problems, including insubordination and unauthorized discharges of firearms. He was honorably discharged from the Navy in 2011, but continued working as a civilian contractor with valid access to military installations. At the time of the Navy Yard shooting, Alexis was employed by a subcontractor for Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, carrying out work on computer systems inside the facility. On the morning of September 16th, Alexis left a Residence Inn hotel where he had been staying and drove a rented Toyota Prius to the Navy Yard. Surveillance cameras recorded him entering the complex at 7:53 a.m. using a valid security pass. At 8:08, he entered Building 197 through the main entrance with a disassembled Remington 870 shotgun, its barrel and stock sawed off to shorten the weapon. He concealed the components in a bag, carried them into a bathroom on the 4th floor, and reassembled the shotgun. At 8:16, Alexis emerged from the restroom and began firing in a cubicle section known as 4 West. 6 people were hit almost immediately. 5 of them were murdered, and 1 survived with serious wounds to the head and hand. Within minutes, Alexis continued moving through the 4th floor, shooting indiscriminately at employees. By 8:20, he had shot and murdered 8 people on that floor. He then descended to the 3rd floor, fatally shooting 2 additional workers and injuring others, including a woman struck in the shoulder as she fled up a stairwell. Witnesses described the gunman wearing dark blue clothing and firing without speaking. By 8:23, police from the Metropolitan Police Department and other agencies began arriving at the Navy Yard. Officers initially struggled to find Building 197 amid the large complex. Lieutenant Bart Dykes, an MPD watch commander, used a map to locate the building and encountered a fallen security guard at the entrance. Sergeant Michael Ware used the guard's access card to open the doors. and gunfire shots was heard as officers entered. Inside the building, Alexis moved to the first floor and encountered Richard Ridgell, a security officer posted at the main entrance. Ridgell was shot and murdered, and Alexis took his Beretta M9 pistol. Armed with both the shot firearm and hand firearm, Alexis continued roaming through the building. He exchanged fire with a security guard and a Navy military police officer, but escaped down a hallway. Soon after, he shot at 2 police officers and a Naval Criminal Investigative Service agent before fleeing again. At 8:34, Alexis reached the west side of the building and attempted to fire at 2 men standing in an alleyway. Finding his firearm empty, he switched to the Beretta pistol. He shot and murdered 1 man while the other escaped unharmed. Reports initially suggested that a second gunman was present because of the use of 2 different weapons, but investigators later confirmed Alexis acted alone. Around 8:55, Alexis moved back to the 3rd floor, where he concealed himself among cubicles. At 9:12, he opened fire on officers and NCIS agents entering the area, hitting Officer Scott Williams in both legs. Williams survived his injuries after being evacuated from the building by colleagues. Alexis remained hidden until 9:15, when DC Police Emergency Response Team Officer Dorian DeSantis and U.S. Park Police Officers Andrew Wong and Carl Hyatt advanced through the cubicles. Alexis fired at DeSantis from only a few feet away, striking his protective vest. The officers returned fire. At 9:25, DeSantis fatally shot Alexis in the head. His death was confirmed later that morning. In total, 13 people, including Alexis, died. The victims ranged in age and were civilian employees or contractors. Among those killed were Michael Arnold, Martin Bodrog, Arthur Daniels, Sylvia Frazier, Kathy Gard, John Roger Johnson, Mary Knight, Frank Kohler, Vishnu Pandit, Kenneth Bernard Proctor, Gerald Reed, and Richard Ridgell. 8 others sustained injuries, 3 from gunfire. Survivors included Jennifer Bennett, who suffered gunshot wounds to her shoulder, chest, and hand, requiring extensive reconstructive surgery. Officer Scott Williams also survived his wounds. The shooting led to extensive reviews of base security and mental health oversight for contractors with access to sensitive facilities. Alexis had previously reported hearing voices and experiencing paranoia. Despite multiple encounters with law enforcement and treatment for mental health concerns, he retained his clearance to work on the Navy Yard project. Because Aaron Alexis was shot dead by the police during the incident, he was never tried, charged, or sentenced. As of August 2025, Aaron Alexis remains deceased. Number 6. Omar Sadiq Mateen. On June 12, 2016, 29-year-old Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen carried out a mass shooting at Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, United States. The attack took place during the club's Latin Night, an event that drew a largely Latino crowd. By the end of the incident, 49 people were brutally shot and murdered, and 53 were wounded, making it at the time the deadliest mass shooting in modern United States history. Omar Mateen was born and raised in New York to Afghan immigrant parents. He later moved with his family to Florida, where he grew up in the community of Fort Pierce. He became a licensed security guard and worked for a private security company, G4S Secure Solutions, for several years. He was known to carry himself quietly in professional settings, though colleagues later described him as having expressed frustration about discrimination and world events. At the age of 29, he was married to Noor Salman and had a young son. On the evening of June 11, 2016, Pulse nightclub prepared for closing, with around 320 people inside. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on June 12, Mateen arrived at the venue in a rented van. He was wearing a plaid shirt over a white undershirt and tan cargo pants. He carried with him a Sig Sauer MCX semi-automatic rifle and a 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol. At 2:02 in the morning, Mateen bypassed Officer Adam Gruler, an off-duty Orlando Police Department officer who was working security at the club. He entered through a southern entrance and began firing into the crowd of patrons. The gunfire caused chaos and immediate casualties. Gruler quickly called for assistance, explaining that his small firearm would not be effective against Mateen's high-powered rifle. Gruler fired at Mateen when he saw him targeting individuals attempting to flee, which caused Mateen to retreat deeper into the nightclub. Within 5 minutes, Mateen had fired nearly 200 rounds. Survivors later recounted scenes of confusion and terror, with some mistaking the gunfire for fireworks. Others hid in bathrooms or behind furniture, while some attempted to shield loved ones. A Marine Corps veteran working as a bouncer, Imran Yusuf, recognized the gunfire and was able to unlock a door, allowing about 70 people to escape. Additional officers arrived beginning at 2:04 in the morning and engaged Mateen in further exchanges of gunfire. He retreated into one of the nightclub's bathrooms, initiating a hostage situation. Mateen fired into the bathroom stalls and murdered some victims instantly and injuring others. Survivors recalled him making statements about United States military actions in the Middle East, telling hostages that he would stop only if American forces ceased their bombing campaigns. Between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, Mateen made calls to 911 and spoke with negotiators. In these calls, he pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State, and referred to the deaths of Abu Wahib and Moner Mohammed Abu Salha as motivating factors. He also threatened that he had explosives and snipers positioned outside, though these claims were later found to be false. In later calls with police negotiators, Mateen said he was carrying out the shooting in retaliation for U.S. airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. He told a negotiator, "Tell America to stop attacking my country." Hostage negotiators spoke with him by telephone, but his threats escalated. By 4:30 in the morning, he told negotiators he intended to strap hostages with explosive vests and detonate them. Authorities then determined that negotiations were no longer viable and prepared for a forced entry. At 5:07 in the morning, an armored vehicle breached the wall of the building. Flashbang devices were deployed and officers entered. Mateen opened fire during the confrontation, and in the exchange that followed, at least 11 officers returned fire. He was shot 8 times and pronounced dead by 5:17 in the morning. His weapons were recovered at the scene, along with empty magazines. After the attack, it was confirmed that 49 victims had been murdered and 53 others injured. Nearly all the casualties occurred inside the nightclub. Most of the victims were of Hispanic descent, with many of Puerto Rican origin. Because Mateen was shot dead during the exchange with police, he did not face trial, sentencing, or imprisonment. Investigators found no evidence that Mateen was directly instructed by ISIS, though he had consumed online extremist propaganda and had a history of making inflammatory comments about terrorism. The FBI had investigated him twice before the shooting due to such remarks, but closed the cases after finding insufficient evidence of a threat. However, his wife, Noor Salman, was later arrested and charged with aiding and abetting Mateen and obstructing justice. Prosecutors alleged she had knowledge of his plans, but in March 2018, she was acquitted after jurors determined the evidence was insufficient. Number 7. Ian David Long. On November 7, 2018, a mass shooting occurred at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California, United States. The assailant was identified as Ian David Long, 28 years old, a former United States Marine Corps corporal who died at the scene of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Ian David Long was born and raised in California. His parents separated during his early childhood, and his father died while he was still a boy. He lived with his mother, Colleen Long, and the two moved frequently before settling in Newbury Park. He attended Newbury Park High School, where former classmates described him as isolated and often frustrated by bullying over his appearance. After graduating in June 2008, Long enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He served from August 2008 until March 2013, reaching the rank of corporal and being deployed to Afghanistan from November 2010 to June 2011. He was honorably discharged. Following his military service, he attended California State University, Northridge, as an athletic training major, though he did not graduate. During his post-military years, Long was involved in a motorcycle accident that left him with a collapsed lung and chronic pain. Medical evaluations diagnosed him with adjustment disorder, with anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and combat-related stress reactions. Law enforcement had prior contacts with him, including a bar fight in 2015 and an incident in 2017, in which police and a crisis team evaluated him for irrational behavior but did not detain him. Reports from a former teacher allege that Long had shown aggression as a student, though those incidents did not lead to charges. On the night of the shooting, at approximately 11:18 p.m., Long entered the Borderline Bar and Grill, which was hosting its weekly college country night, attended by students from nearby universities, including Pepperdine University, California Lutheran University, California State University, Channel Islands, and Moore Park College. He was armed with a legally purchased .45 caliber Glock 21 semi-automatic pistol, equipped with a tactical weapon, light and laser sight. He also carried 7 high-capacity magazines, totaling approximately 190 rounds, as well as a folding knife, 10 smoke bombs, and 2 fireworks. Long first shot the cashier near the entrance before opening fire on patrons. Witnesses recalled that he wore black clothing and had tattoos visible on his neck and arms. He discharged 61 rounds inside the bar and deployed smoke bombs. Some individuals managed to break windows to escape, while others hid in the bathrooms or attic. At least one survivor reported that Long briefly answered a phone call made to a patron's cell phone by their mother during the attack. He also posted short updates on Instagram and Facebook while the shooting was in progress, criticizing responses to mass shootings and referencing gun control debates. At 11:19 p.m., 2 California Highway Patrol officers nearby were alerted by fleeing patrons. By 11:25 p.m., Ventura County Sheriff Sergeant Ron Hellis entered the building with 1 officer. Long, monitoring security cameras, opened fire and struck Hellis 5 times. During the crossfire, Hellis was also accidentally struck by friendly fire from the officer's rifle, which proved fatal. Hellis was evacuated, but later pronounced dead. The exchange of gunfire with officers marked the end of Long's active shooting. At 11:37 p.m., he ignited fireworks from the office where he had taken cover. At 11:38 p.m., he shot himself under the chin, ending the incident. 12 people were shot and murdered in total, including Sergeant Ron Hellis, Bouncer Sean Adler, students Cody Kaufman, Blake Dingman, Jake Dunham, Elena Housley, Justin Meek, and Noel Sparks. Marine Corps veteran Daniel Manrique, Navy veteran Telemachus Orfanos, and Christina Morissette. 16 others were injured, including one with gunshot wounds. The aftermath of the shooting prompted investigations by the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. A 2021 report concluded that Long exhibited animosity toward civilians and college students, possibly exacerbated by his military experiences and mental health challenges. However, the investigation did not definitively establish a singular motive. Since Ian David Long died at the scene, he was not charged, did not face trial, and was not imprisoned. Number 8. Huu Can Tran. On January 21, 2023, in Monterey Park, California, Huu Can Tran carried out a mass shooting inside the Star Ballroom dance studio. He shot and murdered 11 people and wounded 9 others before attempting to continue his attack in a nearby city. Hours later, he was identified as the suspect and died the following day from a self-inflicted gunshot wound during a standoff with law enforcement in Torrance, California. Huu Can Tran was 72 years old at the time of the incident. According to various accounts, he was of Vietnamese origin but had also lived in Hong Kong before immigrating to the United States. He later became a naturalized American citizen and worked in different jobs, including as a truck driver and carpet cleaner. He spent years in San Gabriel, California, and was once married to a woman he met at the Star Ballroom, but their relationship ended in divorce in 2006. People who knew him described him as quick to anger and prone to holding grudges, though not outwardly violent in his marriage. In his later years, he moved to a senior community in Hemet, California, where he lived alone in a mobile home. Reports indicated that in the weeks leading up to the shooting, Tran visited a police station with claims that his family was attempting to poison him and steal money, but he provided no evidence. He had previously experienced multiple disputes and incidents with law enforcement over several decades, often related to suspicions of harassment, threatening phone calls, or conflicts with acquaintances. He also had an earlier arrest for unlawful possession of a firearm in the early 1990s, though the charge was dropped. On the evening of January 21st, the Star Ballroom Dance Studio was hosting a Lunar New Year countdown party, which drew dozens of participants from the local community. At approximately 10:22 p.m., Huu Can Tran entered the ballroom armed with a Cobra M11/9 semi-automatic pistol fitted with an extended high-capacity magazine. Without warning, he began firing into the crowd. Witnesses later stated that Tran fired indiscriminately, walking through the hall and shooting multiple people. 10 individuals were murdered at the scene, among them the studio's owner, Ming-Wei Ma, who reportedly tried to intervene, and Yulan Kao, who was struck while shielding others. Several others were gravely wounded and transported to hospitals, where another victim later died of injuries. In total, 11 people died and 9 more were injured. Tran fled the scene and drove to the Lai Lai Ballroom in Alhambra, about 3 miles away. He entered with the intention to continue shooting, but in the lobby he was confronted by 26-year-old Brandon Zay, whose family owned the ballroom. Zay struggled with Tran, eventually managing to wrestle the firearm away. Tran then fled in a white cargo van. Zay's actions were widely credited with preventing further loss of life. Authorities quickly connected the Alhambra incident with the Monterey Park shooting. Surveillance, witness accounts, and the weapon recovered in Alhambra allowed investigators to identify the suspect as Huu Can Tran. A large manhunt began through Los Angeles County. The search extended through the night and into the following day. At one point, Tran entered a local hospital seeking treatment for injuries consistent with being in a fight. He left without receiving care, but hospital staff recognized him from photos distributed by law enforcement and notified authorities. By the following morning, at approximately 10:20 a.m., on January 22nd, officers located a white van matching the description in a Torrance parking lot. As law enforcement closed in, they heard a gunshot from inside the vehicle. SWAT units surrounded the van and, using armored vehicles and drones, confirmed that the driver was slumped over the steering wheel. Tran had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head using a Norinco handgun. The standoff ended without further casualties. Following his death, investigators searched his residence in Hemet and discovered a bolt-action rifle, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and items that suggested he had been attempting to construct firearm suppressors. A handwritten letter in Chinese addressed to law enforcement was also recovered, though authorities have not released its contents publicly. No direct evidence was found to indicate that he targeted specific individuals at the dance halls. According to the Sheriff's Department, he had not attended the Star Ballroom in at least 5 years, though he had once been a frequent patron and instructor there. There was no legal trial, no charges filed, and no sentencing, as Huu Can Tran died before he could be taken into custody. His death concluded the case against him, and there were no appeals or court proceedings. With his death, questions about motive and final reasoning were left unanswered. He did not leave a publicly disclosed final statement, and there were no further official communications attributed to him beyond the unreleased letter discovered during the search. Number 9. James Urban Ruppert. On Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975, in Hamilton, Ohio, 41-year-old James Urban Ruppert fatally shot 11 members of his family inside his mother's house at 635 Minor Avenue. The victims included his mother, his brother, his sister-in-law, and 8 nieces and nephews. The event became one of the largest familicides in United States history. James Urban Ruppert was born in Hamilton, Ohio, and grew up in a troubled household. His mother, Charity, expressed disappointment at his birth, stating she would have preferred a daughter. His father, Leonard, was known for a violent temper and offered little affection to either of his sons. Leonard died in 1946 of tuberculosis at the age of 37, leaving James 12 years old and his brother, Leonard Jr., 14. Leonard Jr. assumed the role of dominant figure in the family, often taunting James and belittling him. At 16 years old, James attempted to harm himself by hanging, but survived and returned to the family home. As an adult, James was described as quiet, modest, and bookish. He was 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing about 135 pounds. He had no criminal record. He enrolled in college but dropped out after 2 years, eventually training as a draftsman. By 1975, he was unemployed, unmarried, and still living with his mother. He struggled with heavy drinking and carried financial debts. His brother Leonard, in contrast, had earned a degree in engineering, secured employment with General Electric, married a woman James once dated, purchased a home in Fairfield, and was raising 8 children. James was jealous of his brother's success and felt constant pressure from his mother, who threatened to evict him if he did not contribute more to household expenses. On the evening of March 29th, his 41st birthday, James was seen target practicing with a .22 caliber pistol and rifle by the Great Miami River. That night, he visited the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge, where he confided to bartender Wanda Bishop that he was frustrated with his mother's demands and impending eviction, telling her he needed to solve the problem. He stayed until closing time at 2:30 a.m. On the afternoon of Easter Sunday, the 30th of March, Leonard Jr. and his wife Alma arrived at the Minor Avenue home with their 8 children: Leonard III, Michael, Thomas, Carol, Anne, David, Teresa, and John, ranging in age from 17 to 4 years old. The family gathered for an Easter meal, while James initially remained upstairs. Around 4 o'clock, he retrieved a .357 Magnum revolver, 2 .22 caliber handguns, and a .22 caliber rifle, all loaded. He entered the kitchen, where he shot his brother Leonard Jr. in the head, then fatally shot Alma. He then turned the firearm on his mother, shooting her in the head and chest. Moving into the living room, he shot the children one by one. Butler County authorities later determined that some victims were shot multiple times to prevent escape, The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. James remained in the house for several hours. At approximately 7 p.m., he called the police and stated simply, "There's been a shooting." Officers found him waiting at the door and arrested him without resistance. The crime scene revealed 44 shots fired, 40 of which struck victims. He was charged with 11 counts of aggravated homicide. The original trial in June 1975 concluded with guilty verdicts, but procedural issues led to a mistrial. The retrial was moved to Findlay, Ohio. In July 1975, he was convicted on 11 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms. Appeals followed, and in 1982 the Ohio Supreme Court granted a new trial, citing misinstruction of judges in the original case. At the 1982 retrial, a panel found him guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of his mother and brother, while ruling him not guilty by reason of insanity in the other 9 deaths. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. At sentencing, Ruppert showed little visible emotion. He did not offer a personal apology or explanation to the court. His attorneys argued long-standing mental illness, while prosecutors suggested financial motives related to his mother and brother's combined estate of approximately $300,000. Psychiatrists testified that Ruppert suffered from paranoia and delusional thinking. He was incarcerated within the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction beginning in July 1982. He served time at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville and later at Allen Correctional Institution in Lima. In June 1995, at age 61, he was considered for parole but denied. Parole hearings in 2005 and 2015 also resulted in denial, with the board citing his refusal to complete recommended programs, his negative conduct, and strong community objections to his release. In April 2015, the board stated his release would not serve justice. His next hearing was scheduled for April 2025, at which time he would have been 91 years old. In 2019, due to declining health, he was transferred to Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, a medical facility operated by the Ohio prison system. On June 4, 2022, James Urban Ruppert died of natural causes at age 88 while still incarcerated. Number 10. Michael Kenneth McLendon. On March 10, 2009, 28-year-old Michael Kenneth McLendon carried out a mass shooting in southern Alabama that left 10 people dead and 6 others wounded across the towns of Kinston, Sampson, and Geneva. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in Alabama's history. McLendon was born in September 1980 in southern Alabama to Lisa McLendon and her husband. Following his parents' divorce, he was largely raised by his maternal aunt and uncle, Phyllis and James White, in Sampson. Known as a quiet student, he performed well academically and graduated from high school in 1999. Though he once pursued careers in law enforcement and the military, he failed to qualify for the U.S. Marines and dropped out of basic training at the State Police Academy after only a week and a half. Over the years, he held short-term jobs, including work at a warehouse, a sausage plant, and a poultry facility. He had previously filed a lawsuit against one employer, but did not maintain stable employment. He worked at Reliable Products in Geneva in 2003 and later at Kelly Foods in Elba, where he resigned abruptly just days before the shootings. He lived with his mother in Kinston and was unmarried at the time of the attack. Shortly before his death, McLendon wrote a note expressing deep resentment toward his family and frustration about his work life. He complained that his mother's relatives had not supported them, mentioned disputes over a family Bible, and detailed grudges against past co-workers, though none of those named in the note were among his eventual victims. The attack began at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon on March 10th at his mother's house in Kinston, a small community of about 500 residents. McLendon shot and murdered his mother, 52-year-old Lisa White McLendon, as well as the family's 3 dogs. He then set fire to the home. He shot all of them in the head before leaving the scene in his vehicle. He next drove to Sampson, a nearby city of about 2,000 people, and arrived at the home of his uncle, 55-year-old James White. On the porch of the house were James, his daughter, 34-year-old Tracy Wise, her son, 15-year-old Dean Wise, and a neighbor, 31-year-old Andrea Myers, along with her infant daughter. McLendon opened fire, shot and murdered James White, Tracy Wise, and Dean Wise. He also shot Andrea Myers and her 18-month-old daughter Corinne, leading to their deaths. Andrea's infant daughter Ella, 4 months old, was wounded but survived. Andrea's son, 4-year-old Josh, was inside the house at the time and was unharmed. McLendon's aunt, Phyllis White, was also inside and survived. From there, McLendon went next door and shot his 74-year-old grandmother, Virginia White, dead inside her home. He then continued his attack by driving through Sampson and shooting at random targets. At a local gas station, he shot and murdered 43-year-old attendant Sonia Smith. Soon afterward, he shot 51-year-old motorist Bruce Malloy, who was passing by. He also fired at pedestrians and vehicles, wounding several people attempting to flee. His final fatal victim was 24-year-old James Starling, who was shot in the back as he ran away. Police pursued McLendon as he drove along Highway 52 toward Geneva. At one point, law enforcement attempted a pit maneuver, but McLendon returned fire with a rifle, striking Geneva Police Chief Frankie Lindsay in the arm. The chase covered 24 miles before McLendon reached the Reliable Products warehouse in Geneva, where he had once worked. There, he exchanged further gunfire with pursuing officers. At approximately 4:17 in the afternoon, the shooting spree came to an end when McLendon decided to harm himself, leading to his death inside the Reliable Products building. Investigators recovered a Soviet-made SKS rifle, a Bushmaster rifle, and at least 1.38 caliber pistol. He had fired more than 200 rounds during the course of the rampage, and his car contained a large supply of additional ammunition, suggesting he intended to harm more people had he not been stopped. In the aftermath, the Alabama Bureau of Investigation searched his residence and found numerous boxes of ammunition, military-style gear, and medical supplies. They also recovered the note in which he expressed grievances toward his family and declared he had murdered his mother and intended to commit harm to himself. Investigators concluded that he had acted alone and had no broader ties to organized groups. Because McLendon died by hurting himself, no trial, sentencing, or appeals followed. His only documented explanation of the attack remains the writings he left behind, which revealed anger toward his family and disappointment over his inability to establish a career. Authorities described him as familiar with firearms and deeply troubled by long-standing personal frustrations. In response to the scale of the shootings, federal troops from Fort Rucker were briefly deployed to Sampson to assist local law enforcement, a later review by the U.S. pressed. Army determined the deployment had violated the Posse Comitatus Act, which restricts federal troops from performing civilian law enforcement duties. Administrative actions were taken against at least one officer. Local communities organized fundraising efforts for the victims' families. A radio station in Andalusia raised more than $47,000 in cash donations, with additional support in the form of burial costs covered by donated caskets and vaults. Thank you guys for watching. Kindly comment, "Rest in peace," for all the innocent lives lost during these brutal attacks.